Councillor Beattie, would you mind assuming the chair, please?
Not at all. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to be a little bit parochial here because I have to ask some questions about the implications just to make sure I fully understand the post-secondary changes. As you know, Ward 1 is proudly home to McMaster. My colleague from Ward 8, proudly home to Mohawk. And I know Councillor Cassar, if he was here, proudly home to Redeemer. If I could ask, what is from your understanding, if it's a fair question, Acting Director, what is the problem the government is trying to solve with this particular part of the bill?
Through the chair, based on my research and interpretation of a few other comments that are coming through in some of the publication around Bill 185, I believe the intent was more related to the development of student residences as opposed to the overall development of a post-secondary institution. However, the interpretation we've taken with the proposed amendments would have the effect of exempting the post-secondary institutions entirely, not just as it relates to student residents from the provisions of the Planning Act.
So the hypothesis that is baked into that response, as you expertly have assessed it, is that it is planning regulation which is frustrating and thwarting the construction of student residences, which we know has contributed to our overall housing challenge. That's what you're saying? Yes?
Through the chair, yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll come back to that in my commentary. If I could just ask, maybe then I understand the implications. So if a university, for example, has been buying up a number of single-family homes in an area somewhat adjacent to their main campus, does this mean that if they have a plan to assume the remainder of those single-family homes, then that development of that parcel does not have to adhere to the city's planning framework? I just want to make sure I understand, looking forward, if you could spell out the implications in a real-life example time.
Through the chair, we have requested clarification in this exact regard. It isn't clear if the intent was that it only applied to the campus of a post-secondary institution or all of the land holdings. The specific language of the proposed amendment indicates that an undertaking of a post-secondary institution, as defined by the Act, is not subject to the Planning Act. And so that isn't very clear in terms of, as you're indicating, properties that are owned by a post-secondary institution that aren't part of the larger campus footprint. So at this point, a strict reading of that, I would suggest that the interpretation would be that it is included. I don't know if anyone wanted to add to that.
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, I think it's twofold is what this legislation sort of addresses. As we have heard, universities struggle with a financing model to build new student residences. Well, they may get grants for classroom space or laboratory space. They don't get the same funding from the senior levels of government to build new student residences. And the conversation we've had with our universities and colleges is to have.
Good morning.
Just a moment. I'll have the clerk go over an address. Acting GM, please. Steve, please continue.
At the conversations we've been having with the universities and colleges as they develop their campus master plans is to have linkages between growing classroom space with how they accommodate student accommodations. The concern with this legislation is it would allow the university to create a situation where they generate a revenue stream through a development, and that revenue stream would not be subject to any municipal planning controls. So I am aware of some of the universities in Ontario that have done land lease deals to allow townhouse development on their campuses. They will do a 99-year lease, and that becomes a revenue stream that the university then uses to fund other programs. as this is worded, there's a potential there that we would not be able to say to the university, you cannot build this land lease community because, but then they would argue that it's an undertaking. The other issue is, we know, like, for example, Mohawk, they have a Stony Creek campus and they also have a facility at the airport. You could have in a scenario where they would decide to put a student residence adjacent to their industrial campus, and that would have land use implications. We would not normally allow a residential sensitive land use to be built in an employment area. So we would end up into land use conflicts. And then thirdly, it becomes a form of downloading that should a university decide to do something that is not planned for, we may not support, suddenly then our colleagues in HSR would be called upon to provide transit to service that facility. Or that we would have the situation where the current transit would be overloaded by the volume of students. And then also colleagues in PW would have to figure out how to service this facility because a employment use has a different water and wastewater generation than a student residence. And then they rent out the residence in the summer as a sort of accommodations. So it's that sort of bigger bundle that it seems to be the issue. In the city of Hamilton, we've pre-zoned all of the university campuses to allow for residential development to occur. And the zoning permissions could allow for a P3, provided the land is still owned by the college or the university. It's not our planning instruments that are an issue. We designated properties to save heritage properties, and we worked with, Master, and we have a good working relationship with them. So it seems to be the province is trying to address a particular problem on a global scale without considering the unintended consequences across Ontario, what this could mean. And there are severe, we have concerns because this is this downloading, this revenue stream and uncertainty that it interjects into the process. We do have, McMaster bought a parking lot in the middle of a residential neighborhood. That has concerns suddenly if they can use it unfettered for a parking lot, and then there's traffic concerns. We have the off-campus facilities, and then if they grow, which we encourage them to grow and be very successful, there's an economic development, there's benefits to it, but it's happening almost in an ad hoc, unplanned fashion is the potential here without knowing what the outcome would be. If they want to say on a defined, much as the port or the airport is not normally subject to municipal regulations, put a bit of a fence around it and say on this area, it's okay. But if they start growing, to your point about if they buy 2 or 3 houses in a neighborhood, can they turn it into, a variety store, a doctor's office or whatever? And what would be then the impact? That's what we don't know. And we think that we would rather the university follow or the colleges follow a proper planning process, and that planning process should lead with them developing campus master plans like Mohawk and McMaster have, so that we have more certainty of process and then we can plan accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, GM. As the representative for the Stony Creek campus, that's a very interesting scenario that you just highlighted. Anything further, Councillor?
Yes, please. And I guess it's also a discussion to perhaps be had at AFNA, the assessment impact. In Ward 1, we have a public-private residence that has been funded that doesn't pay property taxes. So that's interesting.